It's my pleasure this afternoon. I have this really nice duty to present the European-level policy recommendations coming out of the repair project, one of the important outcomes of the project. Before I start to actually run through the recommendations quite quickly, I just wanted to say three things to set this in context. And firstly, it's important to say that at the heart of the repair project, of course, we have the cultural heritage agenda. And for a long time at European level, this has been more the province of the Council of Europe rather than the European Union. And the approach has been perhaps a little traditional, with an emphasis on preservation. But I hope you can see from the presentations earlier today that what we have in front of us here in repair is a new generation of military heritage and cultural heritage specialists who are very well aware, firstly, that we're in the EU and that there's a very handy range of European instruments we should be using, and also that there are much smarter ways to reuse our military heritage sites. So it's not only about preservation, it's also about generating income and jobs, for example, and we've seen plenty of examples this morning. So the recommendations which are coming out of the project are directed towards the EU level, and they're for the European institutions or for the urban ministers from our national governments, mainly. Secondly, it's important to say that we're going to make some small adjustments. Can you move it for me? Thank you. Come on. The next one? Yeah. Some suggestions for smallish adjustments to this EU toolkit. So no enormous new projects, but rather some rather clever tweaking of our existing tools. So where are these suggestions coming from? Firstly, we have to remember that repair, one of the important concepts of the project, was that we're not just looking at the sites. We're setting the regeneration of the individual sites in a broader context, and we've heard quite a lot about how the sites are set within the context of strategies in individual cities. But it's also the case that the project activities are set in a wider EU context. So one of the things the project partners have been doing is looking at and reviewing the European policy under the 4 pillars, which have been relevant for the regeneration activities. And you'll see that they've been looking much more widely than just structural funds, how we spend this money. So there were references during the presentations to a number of other European tools. For example, Arnold mentioned the Covenant of Mayors on Energy. That's a European instrument. It's not money, but it's linked to getting money, and it's quite useful. So there are many other tools, and you'll see that the recommendations are not focusing just on structural funds. And in fact, Clem said quite a lot this morning about specifically on structural funds, and I think there'll be a little bit more later from Jean-Luc Drumini, making the connection back to the structural funds, because of course Urbact is at the heart of a structural funds programme. And thirdly, just to say that you have the text of the draft recommendations, which were nearly finalised, which I think were in your packs this morning, or there are some spare copies there on the table, looks like this. So I'm not going to read out the detail of all the recommendations, but rather run over them rather quickly and make some points about them. So you'll find that in the repair outputs, we're committed to making 10 EU recommendations, and we have an extra bonus one today. So there are 11 at the moment, because there was a new thing on the agenda which we thought that the partners would like to address. And hopefully we'll finalise tomorrow exactly what will go into print in the final report. So in this list we have 3 kind of general recommendations, and then 6 which are coming directly out of the 4 pillars, and then on the end 2 which are more about the general approach towards policy for urban sustainability at European level. Okay, so I'll start cracking on with recommendation number 1, which is about EU regulation. And perhaps we haven't heard a whole lot today about the importance of European directives for the work in cities, and especially the ways that these are applied to the management of heritage sites. But of course everyone is aware that in their day-to-day work they're a really important part of the context. So there was a brief mention, for example, from Utrecht. We heard about the link to the air quality directive in their work on transport. But there are many other regulations to do with waste management, for example, or energy performance of buildings, where there are special problems and challenges in especially buildings which are protected. And you have to be very clever in the way you use this legislation. So the partners would like to make a recommendation which says that proper attention needs to be given in the EU institutions to the making of directives which are going to have implications for the heritage assets. They need to know a little bit about the consequences. And on the other hand, people working in the heritage business need to know how the directives apply to them. We need to have good guidance. So there's a specific call on the European Commission to prepare common guidelines for compliance with environmental and energy directives for use by local authorities which have large areas of heritage to manage, because actually it's quite tough. And the second one is about EU funding programs. So the partners are really aware now of the wide range of European programs which they can use, and sometimes in quite a clever way, as we saw in the case of Avrig, for example. It's possible for a local authority to use a range of different programs to achieve their goals. And of course we know a lot about structural funds, but there are some other budgets which are especially for innovative demonstration and pilot type projects, and those funds are very competitive. And at the moment there are opportunities for projects, especially around military site conservation, for example, to be funded, but not many. So the partners would like to recommend that there are sufficient opportunities to pursue these kind of smart approaches to regeneration of such sites in all of the funding programs, including these kind of smart funds. And we know that in the new programming period there are going to be some new opportunities. Next week there'll be the launch of something called Smart Cities and Communities, new initiative, which will be for demonstration in energy and transport, and we think we'd like a piece of this. Okay. So thirdly, another one, please. Thank you. This is we haven't really discussed research very much today, but I think Clem referred to the need to be aware of the special challenges in tackling these kind of regeneration programs, and the need to be backed up by good research. We need access to the best research results, and also to help to influence the research agenda. So we know that the ministers, national ministers responsible for innovation and research, have recently adopted something called a joint programming initiative for cultural heritage and global change. So it's going to look especially at the challenges of dealing with climate change, that's energy efficiency and so on, to prevent further global warming, and adaptation to climate change. So a pretty big issue for all of us, and for the managers of military sites, you know, there are additional challenges. So the partners are going to welcome this joint programming initiative, and hopefully some messages from projects like this will be influencing the agenda. And as an add-on, we also know that something is coming up on Urban Europe. It's a new program by national governments wanting to commission urban research. And there's a whole other debate going on. At the time now we're all talking about structural funds opportunities. There's the same kind of debate going on concerning the money for research and innovation after 2014. And there will be in addition this new tool for national research funding bodies to use, and we think this urban one is likely to go ahead. Okay, so now on to the recommendations coming out of the repair pillars, and you'll see the first couple are about mainly energy, and we've made several recommendations concerning the EU 2020 agenda and the new flagship initiatives. So the first suggestion is for the EU 2020 flagship called resource efficiency. And we haven't really touched on this very much today, but it's in the context of policy for green infrastructure. At European level, in both the EU and in the Council of Europe, there's increasingly a tendency to link together the conservation of built heritage with natural landscapes. And we didn't see it so much in the examples today, but when we visited Utrecht and Rostock, for example, we could see that there were fantastic solutions involving the regeneration of sites in a very green way to provide green corridors, areas of open space, much valued by the local community, lots and lots of good work on nature conservation and so on. So these green approaches were very much integrated into the way that all of the partners are managing their sites. So we want to call upon the European Commission to develop an EU strategy for landscape, which is covering both natural and built heritage. So hopefully that will get more work in the next project. Okay.